Cold breath clouded in front of me as I stepped out of the factory at dawn, my hands cracked and red from the last unforgiving shift. It was January, a gnawing greyness pressed onto everything, even the rough stairs down to the street. I let out a sigh that felt heavier than my work boots. Behind me, the other men shuffled out in tired clumps, voices low, talking about rent, strikes, and family. None of them looked up as I passed. I lingered a moment outside the door, letting it swing slowly shut, its clang sending a guilty tremor through me. I'd known it was my last day before I even started. No one liked a dreamer where we worked, least of all my boss. Inside my jacket pocket, the pink slip creased and warm from my thumb, I walked down Rue du Faubourg. Every step echoed the ache in my legs and something harder in my chest. Grief, like I was mourning not just this miserable job but the last brittle ties to my family. If I listened close, I could hear my mother's verdict, say absurd, a cook, in Paris, non mon fils. Not in this life. I was still their disappointment, a joke of a son. I reached the metro entrance and stopped under a flickering street lamp. I turned the slip over in my hand, then crumpled it hard and dropped it into a bin. When the train car rattled away with me hidden in its belly, I watched the world through scratched glass. Paris was waking up. The city's first lights smeared gauzy streaks on the Seine, bakeries yawning open, buses rumbling over puddles still crusted with ice. Even then, something flared inside me, call it stubbornness or clarity. I had nothing now, only the thing I was told to shut up about, the only thing I really wanted, to be a chef. When I reached my apartment, I pressed my forehead to the door before unlocking it. The room inside was bone cold, the walls thin enough that I heard the woman next door flipping on her stove. I dropped my bag and lay on my narrow bed, staring up at the patchwork shadows on the ceiling. My breath slowed. I let myself drift, eyes dry and tired. Sometimes you didn't notice grief bleeding out of you until it was almost gone. It left me slow as Thor, and what was left, just me, and a little wild hope. My cousins called that afternoon, news already swirling through the family. My sister's voice was pinched with pity. Mitchell Mammon says you can come home for a time. Pia still thinks, well, never mind. She hesitated, stretching out the moment. I thanked her politely and hung up. My phone buzzed with messages, worse than the silence somehow. Their words strung sharper each time, that I needed to get serious, that I was an embarrassment, that no one in the family could understand how far I'd fallen. I scraped together the last of my money and registered for a course at a small culinary school on Rue Voltaire. The uniforms were hand-me-downs, and our classes took place in a kitchen no larger than my living room. I worked mornings at a bakery for cash, afternoons in classes, nights washing pots at a brasserie where the chef never smiled at anyone. On breaks, my mother would call, "Cooking is for people who failed at everything else, mon cœur. You're meant for more than onions and potatoes." I said nothing. The next day, she'd ring again. I moved deeper into Paris's belly, smaller rooms, hungrier neighborhoods where no one cared what I dreamed as long as I paid my bills. Days slid past in kneading, chopping, slicing, stirring, tasting. My hands grew strong and quick. The work was honest, at least. Onions never lied, not like people. Still, shame dogged me on slow nights, circling with the memory of laughter from family evenings in Montreuil. I remembered how, after having a few glasses of wine, they'd run my ambition down as a party trick. My cousin René raising his glass and shouting, "To Mitchell, whose greatest dish will be boiled water." The table laughed, even my sister. I'd smiled, but my cheeks burned. No one visited me in Paris. When my name appeared on the schedule as commis de cuisine, not even my oldest friends cared. Each promotion was a private triumph. Each plate I sent out perfectly was a little act of rebellion. I learned the streets found my people, outcasts, artists, the night workers at the market who sold overripe tomatoes for a song. Over the years, I moved up, line cook at a tiny bistro by the Canal Saint-Martin, then sous-chef at a jazz tapas spot crowded every weekend with laughing strangers. I stopped answering family calls. The city shaped me, its winters left me lean and resolute, its spring mornings softened my heart when I passed old couples sharing sticky pastries on park benches. I spent my savings on market produce. Instead of sleep, I read cookbooks stolen from the library, pages stained with bechamel and butter. My loneliness curled up with me each night, my hunger for approval gnawed but never emptied me. I grew older, but the world would not let me forget those old voices, the jeers of family echoing up from my memory at inopportune moments. "Who do you think you are? Paris will never make a place for you." In my 5th year, Chef Laroche from Laroche Bleu heard about a dish I'd made, simple lamb with black garlic. He stopped by during service, silent as an owl, and nodded at the plate I set before him. He left without a word. 2 weeks later, I came to work to find Laroche himself at the pass, hat in hand, offering me a trial. When I told my mother on the phone, she paused for a long moment. Laroche Bleu, your uncle went there once, she said. Well, good luck, but don't expect too much. I worked 18-hour days, my feet numb, the world narrowed to gas burners and shouting and the caress of sauce on the tongue. Chef Laroche rarely spoke but demanded everything. When the Michelin inspectors came, no one was told. I only found out when a quiet ripple of tension ran through the kitchen. A week later, Laroche smiled for the first time. That winter, Laroche Bleu was awarded its 2nd star. There was a photo printed in Le Monde, my face blurry in the corner. For a week, I let myself believe things were changing. I saved every euro I could, dreaming of a place of my own. Evenings shimmered with possibility. When I turned 30, I signed a lease on a shuttered cafe near République. The lights flickered and the floors sloped, but there was a faded rose painted above the bar that I could not stop staring at. Everything about the place felt wrong and therefore right, like something that only needed love to heal. I worked with other scrappy cooks, painting and hammering, sometimes sleeping under a coat in the back room. Spring arrived in Paris and I opened the doors. Les amants oubliés, I called it, the forgotten lovers. My mother sent a card, plain, unsigned, with a line of cautious script. May you know what you are doing, my sister called, voice wavering. If we visit, you'll make time. I lied and said yes, but the idea filled me with more dread than excitement. The restaurant started quiet. A single couple here, a group there, curious faces from the neighborhood. I coaxed flavor from what was cheap and what was fresh. Leeks, wild garlic, old chicken rescued from the market at dawn. I visited farms at the city's edge, loading cabbages into my battered old car, learning names of goats by heart. A blogger stumbled in one night and wrote a glowing review. I leaned into the poetry of food, letting each plate tell a story I could never say aloud. Little by little, word spread. One week in March, a reviewer from Le Figaro visited. No one saw her take photos, but a week later, Les Amants Oubliés became an address whispered in coffee shops and taxi cabs. The next Friday, people lined up in the drizzle, umbrellas like flowers wilting along the curb. I cooked and cooked, letting exhaustion slip away every time someone closed their eyes and sighed over a mouthful. I went home and lay on my bed, arms crossed over my chest, wondering when it might all disappear. Then a call came that would change everything. Mitchell Levasseur, the voice asked, "You've been nominated for Young Chef of the Year." It was like hearing, after all this time, that the world had forgiven me. I stared at my hands, remembering the cuts, the burns, the endless shift work. I let myself feel proud for the first time. My mother found out from neighbors, not me. My phone lit up with calls which I ignored. But my sister would not let it rest. "Please come home," she said. "Just one dinner, everyone wants to see you." The awards were held in a glittering hotel off Place Vendôme, all gold mirrors and marble, waiters skimming past like swans. When they called my name, sharp, perfectly pronounced, I felt every muscle in my face tense, the applause hammered in my ears, I saw photographers flash, and then I realized what I wanted most was to be seen by people who'd never believed. I decided I would go back just once. A month later, I took the train east to Montreuil. The station was unchanged, the pipes still leaking in the ceiling, the world a little smaller than Paris, a little grimmer. I walked the same way I had as a child, heart beating fast. I almost turned away at the door of my mother's building, but someone had seen me from a balcony and shouted down, "Mitchell!" I had a white bakery box in my hand. Inside, a simple gâteau Saint-Honoré, pastry shells rimmed with spun caramel. My hands shook with nerves as I climbed the stairs. The apartment smelled of soap and sour wine. The family was already there, my cousins, older now, my aunts, my sister. The old photos still hung on the walls, my father forever unsmiling. My uncle sat in the armchair, squinting at the TV. The moment I walked in, the room quieted. My mother sat at the table, her hands folded tight in her lap. The sound of her breathing, sharp and shallow, seemed to fill the space between us. René was the first to speak, a laugh forced into his voice. "Here he is, Paris's own chef. Tell me, Mitchell, have you brought recipes for boiled water?" My cheeks burned. For a moment I thought I might drop the cake and run. But then I saw my sister, her eyes shining, and I stepped forward. I set the cake on the table and looked around. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I brought something for everyone." Unpacking the cake, I cut slices and set them on chipped plates, golden caramel glistening in the dull light. One by one, I handed them out. Those first bites were met with silence, mouths chewing slowly, the air tense as rain. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the award envelope. I'd kept it, the wax seal intact, the weight heavy as a stone. I slid it onto the table. "You didn't believe me," I said quietly, "but I did it. I built something real." My uncle leaned forward, squinting. He picked up the envelope, torn between skepticism and curiosity. The seal broke with a snap. He unfolded the paper, reading aloud, stumbling over the elegant script. "Winner, June chef de l'année, Mitchell Levasseur les amants oubliés." A hush descended. For a long moment no one moved. My mother stared at me, her face unreadable, eyes shining with a strange, watery pride. When she spoke, her voice trembled with regret and awe. "You did it, Mitchell." Her hands covered her mouth. She seemed to shrink and grow at once. "Moan fills." René put his plate down. He glanced around, unsure of his role. "I'll be damned," he muttered. He gave a thin, crooked smile, the old mockery sapped of its sting. I met his gaze and something eased between us, if not kindness then perhaps respect. A cousin nudged me, voice soft. "Does it taste different, food from Paris?" I laughed, an ache loosening inside my chest. "Not really," I said. "It's just made with belief." My family, in their own clumsy way, tried to celebrate. They asked about the restaurant, the city, the famous people I'd met. My mother pressed a mug of weak coffee into my hands. Only now did I see the lines on her face, the worry that had aged her while I was gone. She squeezed my arm and I didn't pull away. I let her hold me there for a moment, hearing her breath hitch. Later, as the evening faded and voices grew soft, I stepped out onto the frozen balcony. The city lights shimmered below, yellow and forgiving. I closed my eyes, breathing in the smell of old stone, cold air, distant bread. I thought about the years, the grief of exile, the pain of rejection, the city that had made me at last. My hands, it was always my hands that led me through, burned, knotted, strong as rope. I remembered every night alone in my kitchen, every shift in the dark. And now I was home, changed, something like whole. I turned around and heard my mother behind me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, light, uncertain. "I was wrong," she whispered, voice catching with wonder. "Forgive me." I nodded, facing her fully. I didn't say anything extravagant, just let her see the truth, the fullness of the journey, the strangeness of happiness. We stood there a while, not saying more, beneath the same slant of grey dawn that once sent me reeling from the factory gates. This time I would stay a while. This time the air tasted of clarity, of beginnings, of pride earned the hardest way I knew. And when I returned to Paris, it would not be to prove anything, not anymore. I would go as myself, enough at last.